Hey peeps, so today I'm going to attempt to do my first sketchnoting experience. Miss Moncrief and Miss Hernandez have kind of shown me a little bit about it, so I'm going to attempt that today. We're going to be talking about regional analysis and talking about different types of regions and world regions. These are all things that you will definitely be expected to know by the time the exam rolls around, and it's going to be what we talk about throughout the year. So the first thing you need to know is that regions are basically all about what unifies a specific place. So that can be based off of characteristics or different activities that happen there. So we're going to start by writing that definition right here. Regions are defined on the basis of one or more unifying characteristics. How do I spell that? There we go. Or patterns of activity. Basically, all you need to know is that regions are similar to each other. So if you think about like Wakeland High School, there are different regions within the school, right? Like we have our D hall, which is like all the social studies people, right? You have your fine arts hall down by the band hall and the auditorium. Then you have your like gym and sports wings, right? All of those could be different regions within our school. So we're just like going to blow that up and kind of think about different world regions and think about how things are unified and grouped together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look at types of regions. There are three types of regions that we're going to talk about. The first one is formal. Formal regions, I'll be honest, are ones that I kind of struggle with the most. I don't know why, but formal really just means that these are regions that are united by one or more traits. Or more traits, okay? So we could, if we're thinking about formal, we could draw a little, here's my dress to prom, right? Fringy on the bottom, and if I wore tux for the guys, ooh, that's ugly. Here's my tux and my little bow tie. Right, that kind of looks like a tux. Okay, so our formal regions really just mean that they're united by traits, so it makes them more uniform, okay, or homogeneous. That's the word. Okay, examples for this. Let's write down some examples. There's three different types of examples that you could have here. First one is physical. So if you're united by the same physical traits, that would be like the Sahara Desert in North Africa. Oh, what's wrong with my pen? There we go. In North Africa. Okay, so they have the same physical like climate and landscape, right? It's all desert. So that unites them. That is a physical, formal region. Okay, another example could be cultural. So in culture, like in our culture unit, we'll talk about different languages and religions. So for this example, we are going to put that like the Spanish, like speaking Spanish. Well, what am I trying to say? The Spanish language. There we go. Wow. In Argentina. Okay, so that unites the Spanish like the Spanish speaking population in Argentina. Okay. And then the last one is economic. So an economic region, remember economic is kind of like money. What brings in money, what kind of businesses, stuff like that will run your economy. And a good example of this is the Gold Coast in the Gold Coast and exports in Ghana in Africa. Okay. So really, when you think about these formal regions, the big idea here is that like what are your what do other countries like recognize you for? So in Ghana, really big for the Gold Coast. It's where they produce a lot of gold. Okay. Argentina speaks Spanish. We know that in northern Africa there is the Sahara Desert. So all of these are just formal regions. The next one we have is functional. So we're going to write that over here. I'm going to come over here. There we go. Here, let me zoom in over here. So we have functional regions. This one is kind of easy to remember because it has a specific function, okay? That is typically going to be based around certain nodes. So we're going to call it nodal. Okay. Basically, the image that we're going to draw here for this one is that this node will interact with things around it. Okay. So that's what's going to unify this group or this certain region. So it's organized around a specific point. Oh no. Organized around a focal point and is defined by an activity that occurs across that region. Okay, so it's gonna this region is united by this function, this activity that's happening in the middle. Okay, and is defined by an activity. Let's underline that word because that's the important part here. That occurs across a region. I need an I. There we go. Okay, another important part to this is that it is united by networks. I'm going to underline that word too. So networks of communication and transportation around that node, okay, around whatever is happening. Centered on a node. Okay, so good examples of this, I think in your book, it says that, let's see, I think it says that a pizza delivery area would be one. So think about like, where is it that you order pizza from? What Pizza Hut do you order from? And as far as they go, that's their functional region. Okay, so the Pizza Hut, like right next to Target, yes, I know there's one there because that's where I get my pizza from. So as far as they reach, I don't know where another Pizza Hut is, but the functional region of the Pizza Hut right next to Target is going to be however far they are like willing to drive, okay? And that's their function. So that's connected by the movement of the car, right? That's a service, that is a delivery, that's movement back and forth to a place, okay? and think about like all of your Uber Eats and stuff that you try to get to come to school and whatnot, like all of that, that is a functional region, all of those places like that. Okay. Another really good example of this is an airport. So think about this diagram, or not diagram, that little picture that I drew there. That's truly an airport, right? You have airplanes coming in and out of a place. And so that's a functional region. All right. And then another one could be, let's see, a country and its capital. And the thought process here is that like you have to have communication and like infrastructure and transportation in and out of cities surrounding its capital into the other cities throughout the country, right? So that's a functional region. Okay. Schools could also be a functional region. Think about how you go home and you come to school every day. That is movement. That has a function. Okay. We come to school for a function. That's the activity that's happening. And so that movement back and forth, that consists of the functional region there. Another one that might make more sense is like the FC Dallas like soccer games, right? Think of that like across the tollway. So people come in and out of Frisco, specifically that area, to watch soccer games or to come in to soccer practice. You might have to go over there to all those soccer fields over there for practice. And so that movement of coming back and forth is a functional region as well. The next one we have is perceptual. So I'm going to come back over here. Perceptual. Perceptual. There we go. Perceptual regions, okay? So I'm going to draw a little guy here who is thinking, or he's smiling and he's thinking. Okay, so here's my little light bulb. Does that look like a light bulb? Maybe if I draw like that, maybe. Sure, that looks like a light bulb. Great. So our short term for this, bad arrow, is going to be vernacular. Oh, didn't spell that right. Okay, so vernacular really just means like the words that are spoken by people in a specific like place. Okay, so it's going to change depending maybe on who you're talking to. So this is technically defined by the informal sense of place that people give to it. Okay, so defined by the informal sense of place that people ascribe to them. This is very subjective, okay? So this is not going to be like uniform across. So this is kind of like the opposite of formal up above. So where formal is pretty uniform across the board, perceptual regions are going to change based on like who you're talking to. Okay, so the boundaries are going to look different because people have a different sense of what defines that region. Okay, so that's what we're going to write down. Boundaries vary. Widely because people have a different sense of place. Okay, so that might, well, let's see, a different sense of place. Yeah. Okay, so examples of this might be to help you understand this a little bit better because it's kind of confusing. Examples would be like the American South. What is defined as the South? Do we really know? Like, what states are considered South? We clearly will consider Texas as South, right? But does everyone in the United States consider Texas South? Or do they only consider like Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi the South? And what's the Midwest? That one is really fuzzy to me, because you can have a whole range of states considered the Midwest. Like my best friend who lives in Minnesota considers Minnesota the Midwest, but to me that's North, right? So it depends on where you're coming from. Another example is the Middle East. What really is the Middle East? Is it the middle of the Eastern Hemisphere? Because it's not really. It was technically, that term kind of came about from when people in Western Europe were talking about the East. They were talking about China, right? Like going east was to go all the way over to China. And so the Middle East was kind of in between Europe and China. So that's kind of how that came about, but it's not really in the middle of the Eastern Hemisphere. So it's misleading. It depends on your view of that. Another one could be upstate New York, or yeah, I've heard that before. So I think that's an example used in your book too. What really is considered upstate? How far, like what counties are considered in upstate? It really just depends on who you're talking to. Okay, so this is all about perception. What do you think of when you're asked something? Okay, it might be different than the person sitting next to you based on how someone was raised, based on your backgrounds, based on your beliefs, and the way your parents raised you, really. That's kind of what it can come down to. So that those perceptual regions are harder to define. All right, so those are our three types of regions: formal, functional, and perceptual. So I'm gonna draw lines to all of these so that you know, okay? The next thing we're gonna talk about is world regions. So I want you to look at the map. I will either post it on Canvas with this video, or you're going to have a hard copy of it looking in front of you. So if you have that hard copy, pull it out and look at it now. And if you are looking at this on Canvas, then you need to pull up this map. So that way when I'm explaining this and we're writing this down, you can be looking at this map, or these two maps, so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so the first map that you're going to see, the top one, is going to show our large regions. So I'm going to come over here to our notes and write large. So with our large regions, there are 10 of them, okay? This is really just the 7 continents, okay? And then there are 3 cultural regions that are included in this too, okay? So if you're looking at that top map, that's the large regions, okay? So you have North America and South America, but look, you also have Central America. So that's a cultural region that the world recognizes is similar, okay? So North America, Central America, and South America. Then you have Antarctica, okay? And then you have Europe, and then the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation, that's a cultural one, right? So that's a culture one. Then you have Asia. You have Oceania over on the east side of the map. That includes Australia, New Zealand, and a lot of those islands, okay? and then look at Africa in the middle. So Africa is we will talk about Africa as two different kind of pieces. You have Africa, like northern Africa is Sahara, okay? That's the Sahara Desert, and it is greatly different than sub-Saharan Africa, okay? Culturally, physically, it is very different, and we'll talk about that as we go throughout the year. But you need to know that Africa definitely has two different like pieces to it. So when you see Africa or northern Africa, that's talking about the Sahara, mostly Muslim, mostly speaking Arabic. And then in sub-Saharan Africa, that's a cultural region too. Sub-Saharan Africa, that is has a very different climate. They are very tribal. They speak different languages and have different religions. Okay, so that's kind of how you break up Africa. So if you look at that top map, you see all 10 of those large regions. Now you can break up those larger, that like these large regions into smaller ones. Okay, and you can do that by changing the scale of what you're looking at. Okay, I'm gonna make that darker so that that stands out to you. So that you're changing the scale. And if you were to zoom in on it, on any of those regions, okay, any of those large regions, if you were to zoom in on North America, what would you find? You could break those down. You could break North America down into a lot of smaller regions within that, right? That's where you have the Midwest, the South, the East, the West Coast, right? The mountain regions, okay? So those can all be changed into smaller regions based off of any of that stuff that I just talked about. So it could be climate, it could be landforms, culture, politics, you name it. Economy. So when you do that, when you break large regions into smaller regions, it's almost like you're making those into formal regions, right? Does that sound familiar? Remember how we said formal regions are united based on one or more traits? So the smaller regions that you're looking at on that big map, if you were to zoom in, whatever, that those characteristics that are uniting the smaller regions, those are formal. That's also a formal region. So there's some overlap there, okay? All right, and the last thing we need to talk about is subregions. So I'm just going to come down here and go subregions. S's are kind of hard. I don't know how you make that pretty. Okay, so subregions. Subregions are gonna refer to the second map that you see on that map handout. Okay, the subregions is where you break down those larger regions into a lot of different other regions. Okay, so they share some of the characteristics from the larger regions that you see from the first map, but there will be distinctive like traits that make them into these smaller subregions. Okay, so share some characteristics with the larger, with the rest of the larger regions. But is distinctive. Let's underline that word. That's the important thing here. In some ways. Okay, so I want you to look at your second map that you see on that handout, there's a ton of things labeled on this map, right? So if you look at North America, now that's broken down into Canada and the United States. Obviously, we're different, right? Some big ones, that easy ones, I think that might make more sense to us, is if you look down at South America, you notice you have South America, but also like Brazil is kind of cut out. It's own subregion, because unlike the rest of Latin America, that is one large subregion, right? You see it in the brackets. From Mexico all the way down to Chile and Argentina. That's all known as Latin America. They're all very culturally similar. But Brazil is not included in Latin America because they speak Portuguese, right? They were settled by Portugal, and so therefore they are not like the rest of Latin America. So if you want to write that down as an example, Brazil and Portuguese. How do you spell that? Portuguese. There we go. Another one could be like in Europe. If you're looking at Europe, yes, we know that Europe is very united, right? They have the EU, they have open borders, they have the Euro, right? Europe is very strong. But if you look at the subregions map, you notice that there's Western and Eastern Europe, okay? And a lot of that has to do with post World War II divisions, okay? So Western Europe is kind of culturally different than Eastern Europe, and like economically has a different past just because of that split after World War II. And so those are known as different subregions too. So if you want to write that down, you can just put East versus West Europe. Maybe that'll help you remember. Okay, so really just take a look at that second map, and you'll notice that Africa is now split up into a ton of different subregions, right? And you have a lot in Asia as well, okay? And then all of the islands too over by Australia and in the Pacific, all right? So you can break down the larger regions map into the sub-regions map as well. So that's all that I had for you. I wish we could have done this in class, but we didn't get to that today, so that's fine. You need to take notes somewhat like mine. I mean, you don't have to attempt the sketchnoting like I do, but I do want you to have all of these things written down that I have: formal, functional, perceptual, and then with the world regions, large, smaller, and subregions, okay? So this is what is going to go on your number 4, I believe. Yes, it's going to be number 4 on our Google folder. So you'll have the notes, and then I also want you to include the maps page as well. Thanks, guys.